Hello, and welcome to another Cloud Podcast, a podcast designed to bring you stories from the smartest minds in IT, operations, and business, and learn how they're using cloud technology to improve business and the customer experience. All right, well, welcome to another Cloud Podcast. Today, we're excited to have Dominic Marci over at Johnson Controls. He is the Director of Technical Services. Dominic, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Artie, of course, my co-pilot, as I always like to say. Good to see you. Well rested after a long weekend.
Yeah, well rested after this Labor Day weekend. I took an extra day, so I had a 4-day weekend. Hopefully everyone's pretty well rested. I know it's Tuesday morning for us, but in the podcast world, it really doesn't. It feels like Monday to me.
That's right. When it finally gets out there, it's another day. So Dominic, typically what we like to do is introduce you, get a little bit of background for the audience on, how your career path, how you got to Johnson Controls, what you've been doing there over the last 30 plus years. So why don't you just take a couple minutes and just give us a little background about how you got into this technical services role and what you're doing over there now.
Sure, absolutely. So when I graduated from college, I started as a technician working in a field organization for a Simplex time recorder. So I was working on fire alarm systems and security systems, doing installations, service, and so on. And then after a few years, I was given the opportunity to move up into a technical support role, again at Simplex time recorder. So we're working on providing support to other technicians like I was previously. Then that rolled into another position where we were working on access control and security systems. I became the specialist for that and for a new product we were introducing. And as that product was released and was successful, we brought in more people. I became a supervisor. Then later that became a manager position. And that was at the time that we had a merger between Simplex Time Recorder and Tyco. And then that led to expansion of my role where I became senior manager for the tech support team. And then ultimately, around later, we were acquired. We merged Tyco and Johnson Controls, and at that point, my role became more global. So while we always had some sort of an international capability when we were at, previously when I was in Simplex Time Recorder, later in Tyco, we started getting more and more global. That became even more enhanced with the acquisition with Johnson Controls. So I had multiple team members that were reporting to me, a fairly large size technical support group, technical services actually, because we did support for salespeople prior to the project being awarded and help them with identifying the correct products to use. Then during installation, I had team members that would provide installation support and then also post-installation service support. And I also had some groups that were in application engineering that would help ensure that the orders are processed properly and that the systems are configured to what the customers are looking for, and also would provide programming for those systems to help the technicians when they're doing installations to have at least a head start of how the system needs to be programmed and what it needs to do to effectively secure the building. And I also had team members that were responsible for providing training. So my group did a lot of support from the very early stages of the project to well past the end and coordinating through end of life activities.
Yeah, and you've been in the industry for 3 decades now, so you've seen a lot. You talked a little bit about mergers, changes, acquisitions. Talk to us a little bit about that change management as you're leading people through those changes. What was easy? What was hard? How many have you seen in the last 30 years with your company? Just very interested in that world. And I'm sure that people who are going through that today with the pandemic, acquiring other companies or being acquired or merging with other companies, they would love some tips and tricks with regards to change management.
Sure. I think I was very lucky that early on in my career, I had some really good supervisors that I reported to that laid the foundation and kind of set the stage for how I was going to conduct my leadership for our teams. So one of the things that had happened is I was very used to getting changes in management throughout So I would, my department would report into another group. We moved from service to manufacturing to quality assurance to R&D. And this was happening every couple of years. So even when things appeared stable and there weren't a lot of mergers and acquisitions, we still had a lot of changes because your organization has to change to adapt. And you can't just stay in one particular role or one particular division if the business is moving and trying to grow. So one of the things that we also tried to do is we tried to identify best practices, where there was things that we were doing and we adopted, or things by other departments that were doing that we wanted to bring that information in. And as the organization grew and we went from Simplex to Tyco to Johnson Controls, the span of the business was increased each time. And we had more opportunity to bring additional information in and to share those best practices with other members. So it's identifying what you do well, maintaining that, and then identifying continuously, looking for opportunities for improvement. That was one of the things that, even though there was mergers, acquisitions, and organization changes happening around us, our strength was the support that we're providing, and that's what was attractive to other businesses or the divisions, that they wanted to, the things that we're doing well, we needed to keep doing, and the things we needed to change and improve, we needed to adopt those. So I always try to tell my team members that, I'm reporting to a different person, but you're not. You're still reporting to me, and I'm still going to provide the same level of leadership that I have throughout. So you just continue to do your job. Let me worry about anything that's happening with the organization that we have to make changes or adjustments. And once we figure out what those are, what they need to be, I'll be sure to notify the team that these are some things we're going to do a little differently. So that's kind of how I looked at change management. Change the things that need to be changed and hold fast to the things that are very effective and been serving you well. Because again, that's kind of the, when you have a merger between two organizations, you want to keep all the strengths. And we felt that we had some pretty strong processes.
Yeah, I like that idea of, keeping things consistent when you can and bringing in best practices as you're going to different departments or being led by different silos within the company, and using those best practices to bolster your team. And it seems like a lot of what you did was you're a little bit of the blocker, right? Keeping all that outside noise away from your team so they're not getting distracted by all like the different changes happening, which any large organization like Johnson Controls, Tyco, there's changes just inevitable. It's always happening. So be able to shield them from all that distraction, I think, is one of for me, a key takeaway to managing that change.
Yeah, that's something I always felt strongly about, is that I needed to make their lives easier. That's my role as a leader, is to find out what I can do to make their lives better and how I can shield them from things that they can be shielded from so that they can be successful. And the other thing I've always told them is that when we succeed, that's their success, and when we fail, that's my failure. So not only am I trying to block them from other things, I'm trying to give them the courage to do things differently, to try to adapt and adopt new things and experiment with them, and don't be afraid, because I've got their back. And I felt that was an important thing for me to share with them as well.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about global leadership. You also we've talked about the size and scale of the organization that was underneath you. And you also talked a little bit about how everyone wore different hats: training and onboarding, tech support. I'm sure there was some infusion of QA and development and tracking of that stuff on the other side, passing of information to the engineers to help support the tooling and the systems. So talk to us a little bit about and maybe frame this in a way as if you're helping someone grow their organization. Maybe they don't have a global approach. Maybe they don't have size and scale quite yet. Maybe they don't have the complexity that you have with the training, onboarding, tech support. What advice would you give someone to help them get to that level? What are the things to do or things not to do when they've got an executive coming over to them and saying, we need to go global. We need to have a contact center in the UK or in Ireland. Like, how would you recommend they take the next step?
Yeah. So again, I think have a strong foundation. One of the things that I tried to do with our organization was was build it so it would be scalable, so that we had some techniques that we used. We adopted knowledge-centered support very early. Back in '97, we actually started doing that, when it was knowledge-centered support. Now it's knowledge-centered service. But we adopted those principles that we would capture information, try to capture it live during our communication, because that's where we're going to get the details of the particular issues that are coming in. We added that to our our call tracking system, so that we could identify the knowledge that we were sharing with individual callers and being able to track that over time, and also identify the number of times that we're using a specific piece of information for all of our callers. So we could see it from both directions, both on the individual basis and then on the larger scale. So when we did that, that allowed us to scale up and to add additional members of our team to match our call volumes. So you're always looking at trying to, if you look at the, how you set up a contact center, and you're using like Erlang tables, and it's basically a knee curve. At certain points, adding 1 or 2 more staff people is going to improve your performance. And then once you hit that knee, the top part of the curve, then you could add 4 or 5 people, and you're not going to add any more performance. Maybe you're going to move your service level up slightly, but your cost is also getting out of whack. So, as a manager, the management part of the business, you try to keep your costs at an effective level, so that's what you present back to the business. Like, here are some of the key metrics that we're going to measure, and this is how we're going to decide that it's time to add additional staff. So that's how we handle just the day-to-day interaction, just the team, as it is. When you're looking at then adding in other departments and other groups, which is what we did, we had contact centers that were already established in other areas, that now had to roll under my management. One of the things in that situation is you've got to identify what they do well and what they do that needs improvement. And you can't do that instantly. It's not a snapshot. You've got to evaluate it. You've got to talk with the folks. You've got to understand how they operate, why they operate, because what they're doing, there's probably a good reason for it. And the way they're doing things is probably something that market it requires. For example, our team that I had in Australia, New Zealand, the way they approached the market was different than what we do in North America, and it was by necessity. That's what the market was demanding. They do. So they provided their service a little differently. They were more on-site commissioning, where in North America, we were more, we were just phone support basically, or email support, where folks would just reach out to us, but they would hardly ever see us. That's not how we're doing it in some other areas. So if I went in there and said, oh, that's wrong because the way we do it in North America is this way, I would have completely scrambled the organization. So if you have an existing one, identify the things they're doing well, which was a lot. And what are the things that we were doing as best practices that they could start adopting? And one of those was they weren't like capturing their cases. So we asked them to start doing case management, to start doing knowledge management, integrating that together. And that was an improvement that we can make there. I had another experience where I was starting a new organization in India, where we had a new contact center that we're putting in there. So that was a ground up. And the best thing I could say there is identify your resources that you're going to have at your disposal. There's going to be R&D staff. There's going to be IT staff. There's going to be HR staff. They're all familiar with the culture so that you don't make missteps. And they can provide guidance, because culture is a huge part of this. The technically what we're trying to do, that's the easy part. Dealing with the differences of how people perceive different things is where some of the challenge comes in. And just being able to adopt, again, the best practices for that region. It may not match exactly what we do in North America or even in Australia, but it will work in the India area and provide the same or better level of support that we're trying to do on a global basis, because we're leveraging the strengths of each individual area, the people that are available that we can hire, and ideally bring in the best people you can. Sounds silly, but even if that means that there's some additional costs associated with it. So for example, one of the things that we did when we started the group in India was we were having them match the day shift of North America, which means because of the time zone differences, they're working at night. But because some of the best candidates that we had were also female, we needed to make sure that we had met the security needs of that region. So India does require that we have security and actually travel arrangements from portal to portal. We bring them from their home to work and then back again, and make sure that there's security there for them. So I wanted to make sure that we're getting the best, and that included a diverse group of individuals. And once we got them, together and working well, it was a very strong organization. We had very low attrition because we did the groundwork to kind of build in a good team that worked well together, that had the right attitude, had the right capabilities, and so on. So those are the kinds of things that I would share with folks. Be mindful of the culture, be mindful of things that you do well, and identify things that could be improved based on your expertise. But don't just make changes for change's sake. Identify the things that are going to work in those individual markets.
Yeah, that's great advice. And Alex, I'll toss it over to you. But before that, I'll share a little story. I was doing some consulting and helping some people break into the European markets, and being culturally deaf is not good. Doing a cookie cutter, it worked in North America. Just let's copy and paste and do it in another region. You can alienate a lot of the locals or the people who are potentially customers of your brand. And one of the examples here was that we found that as this organization grew into Europe, the Germans, the German-speaking customers would prefer very fast handle time. So efficiency was extremely important to them. They would like to get on the call, get the answer, and get off. Not a lot of small talk, just much like what they do in their engineering world. They like everything done and measured and perfectly synchronized. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Italian and French markets are a little bit more laissez-faire. They would love to have a conversation with you, have that small talk. That's a part of them doing business, is the small talk. So the handle time for those types of conversations were longer. Same exact intent, same exact everything, same process for the agents to do the actions on the other side. But we saw talk time for Germany very short and talk time for Italy and France very long. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't hold them to the same standards. You couldn't say, hey, this region, you have to perform the same way that this other region does. So you have to really understand the culture and why things are happening, and go beyond just looking at KPIs and metrics.
Yes, exactly. That's kind of my experience as well. You can't just, it's not all cookie cutter. You have to take the cultural and traditional, backgrounds into account.
Yeah, and I think it's just a thoughtful approach to leadership as well, right? Not just taking your thought and just pushing it on everybody else, but you're really taking a thoughtful approach to making sure that you're aligning with their culture, with the way they do things, and still, like you said earlier, taking the best practices in, or maybe offering some best practices on what you do in North America that could work here, and getting them and collaborating to see, how we can drive other efficiencies. What I find interesting, Dominic, is that because you've been in this industry for so long and you've ridden the mergers and acquisitions up to Johnson Controls, is how you've seen technology play a role. You mentioned like the curve with the knee, and you hit a certain spot where throwing more people at it doesn't add more efficiency, it just adds more cost, and you get a very tiny bit. Where have you seen technology play a role in kind of getting past that knee spot to drive mm-hmm. efficiency?
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that we're an early adopter of knowledge-centered service. And that's one of the things that allows us to scale and maintain a very high level of accuracy and consistency in the support we provide. So that's something that I can't emphasize enough. With a knowledge-centered approach, you're capturing information, and this is an experience that each time it's a new entry into your knowledge base, it's a new experience. No one else has seen this before. Now you're documenting it for the first time, mm-hmm. And then that makes it available for reuse, and it's great to be able to use that internally. And we took advantage of that quite a bit, where we identified different ways that people can have issues with our products, whether it was self-inflicted because they didn't follow the installation instructions, or they missed some subtle nuance, or it was a design issue or manufacturing issue that we had to get on top of. And those, we would identify them, we would follow them to closure. And then whatever the result was, whether it was a changing out a circuit board or changing how the system was programmed, or even we would recommend change to a manual or coverage in training, whatever that was, we would document that information and make that available. So it was great to allow us to scale up and bring in new team members. And one of the challenges to that is if you have somebody that's got 20, 30 years experience and they've seen a lot of things and they know how to do a lot of things, it's when you just try to introduce knowledge-centered service, it's very difficult because they feel that their value to the organization is that they've memorized all that stuff and they kept it up here and they could draw on it at any particular time. But what we have to do is we have to convince them that, here's the vision of where we're trying to go. We're trying to establish a vision that whoever calls us and whoever takes the call, whether you're on vacation and somebody else is filling in, they have access to all that same information, that they can share that with the caller and help them get to resolution as quickly as possible. And that the value to the knowledge engineer, right, who up until this point, up until we adopted a knowledge-centered service model, we were just relying on their availability and being able to route the calls to them. Now that's no longer the case. Now they document that information, they put it down, which frees them up for the next thing, something that maybe they haven't experienced before. But now that they know how to capture that and put it into a quality article that can be reused by others, it does a couple things. First of all, it stops the path that's worn out to your door, where everybody else is like, for the first time they're in it, they have to walk over and ask you how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also allows that to be critiqued and improved over time. I don't know how many times when I was a support specialist that I put something that absolutely knew this was correct. This was the reason why this problem happened. And over time we found out, oh, it looks like that, but it was actually something a little different. Mm-hmm. So now my team members can look at that article that I created a year ago and say, no, let's just edit it modestly and make these couple changes. And suddenly it's just a much better shared article. That allowed us to bring in folks that didn't have any product experience. When I was setting up that new team in India, mm-hmm. they never really saw the product before. They didn't have any experience to draw upon, but we showed them how to operate the systems. We put them through some basic training on the panels and so on, our products, but then show them how to use the tool to find the information. And if it's a well-structured article, it's very, very quick that you'll be able to see that, yeah, this is the problem you're telling me about, and this is what it's going to take to resolve it. And so that's the big change in technology that I saw that I thought was tremendous, that allowed us to do that. And I also mentioned that we integrated it with our case management system. So we have a case management system, issue management, escalation management, and knowledge management. We had them all tied together, and they all kind of worked off of each other. So if we had a case that became an incident, because now this is a one-to-many type of thing, like, okay, the thing you're reporting is something that could affect multiple customers, so we should probably get ahead of the curve right now and start working on that. Then once we confirm that it's something that is wrong, that needs to be addressed, it becomes an escalation. And then, like I said before, once we get to the point where now we resolve that, we feed that information back into the knowledge tool, and now we've got a closed loop from beginning to end. We knew what happened, why it happened, and what it took to resolve it, and that becomes instantly available. And then taking that knowledge and making that available to your customer, which was another tremendous thing, that we have a website that allows the customer to log in and do their own searches. So it was like a Google search specific to our products, and they could look up any of that information on a 24/7 basis. So now that takes some of the pressure off of me having a multi-shift organization, where we could still have our main hours of operation, but on weekends, holidays, times where maybe the lead person is out sick, somebody can find this information on their own, whether it's internally or, even more importantly, our external customers.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I was going to bring you in, Artie, because your line of work and your support is much less technical than what Dominic has with what they're supporting. So how do you see the difference playing out, or you see a lot of similarities, even though Dominic's is very technically driven with the systems that they're deploying and the people that are calling in for support?
Yeah, good question. And in the retail world, it's less technical, so it's less technical support, but we still get the same repetitive questions day in and day out that eventually need to be published as self-service FAQ articles. It's basically the same type of content, except it's less steps. So instead of it being a 10-step process to resolve whatever the issue is, it's really just here's the answer. And we find that we have very similar issues with people who've been there forever, who know it like the back of their hand. We call it tribal knowledge, and it's hard to get them to take the time to put that content down so that it can be digestible for not only their peers but also for self-service articles in that double loop approval process. It's hard to convince them to do that for a couple reasons. One, they don't see a lot of value in it immediately. There's no instant reward. Like if you were to write a Help Suite article, there isn't a, wow, I just helped 3 people. It takes time for people to find that article, to adjust the article, to respond to it, to maybe add comments if you allow public comments. And then they also have to maintain it. So another downfall is if they were to put content out there in the KCS model, people may critique or change or comment on it, and they have to almost moderate that. And that to them, that feels a little bit like a burden. So it's hard to get people, especially the tribal knowledge or knowledge chiefs, as we call them, to really take the time to digest information, write it down, publish it. But once you start getting that with probably your more senior people, then it starts to become a snowball effect. Then everyone goes to that area. Then everyone uses it as a resource. Snowball effect in a very positive way. So Dominic, tell us a little bit about how you, from a change management standpoint, how do you get your team to go from no KCS or no knowledge-centered support or service to at least a little bit to hopefully, thriving, and that's where they turn to. If they don't know something, they look it up. If it's not there, they add it. How do you change the culture of the team to get them there?
Yeah, so one of the things that we had to do this multiple times as we added new groups into the organization is that you have to establish the vision, like what's in it for me, right? So for every member, it's a burden, right? What they were doing is they could just answer questions off the top of their head, and they didn't have to write it down. They didn't have to search and find. It's like, I already know the answer. Why do I have to go through the motions to identify which article I used and attach it to the case and go through all that? It's gonna take me longer. It's more work and so on. So you have to establish the vision of what we're trying to accomplish, and what we're trying to do is, this is kind of like the inside joke. We're trying to work ourselves out of a job by making it so that people don't need to contact us because the information is already readily at their fingertips. But I said, don't worry. They're constantly making new products. There's always new things to learn. So we'll never completely be successful at working ourselves out of a job. But we can make it easier for our customers. And by making it easier for our customers, we're also making it easier for our co-employees, so that our coworkers can generate that knowledge and benefit from having it available to them. But they also, as I mentioned, you're going to have some folks that want to keep that information close to the vest, and they don't want to share it because they see that that's taking away some of their power. And then you have others that immediately catch on to the vision. They say, I understand. It makes perfect sense. If I do this, I won't have people constantly, interrupting me while I'm trying to support somebody, coming over and asking me a question that, I'd swear I just told somebody the answer, 5 minutes ago. So those folks catch on really quickly. And those are the ones I usually target as my champions, because those folks tend to be experienced. They tend to be well respected within the organization. And now they understand what we're trying to get at, and understand that this is not taking power away from them. This is actually giving them new superpowers that they didn't even know they had, or that were even available to them. So now you have your peer team working with each other, helping to coach and convince others that might be more skeptical that this is okay and it's a good thing, and maybe provide some examples directly on support that they're doing. Because it's one thing for me to say, "Oh, this is going to make your life easier. It's going to make it," but if your champions are able to do that directly with their peers on their lunch breaks, coming in or going back from meetings and stuff like that, that's how you build that grassroots kind of thing where, I'm working from top down saying, this is great, this is why we want to do this. And it's also from the ground up, because you've got the buy-in where folks see the value of it and they help you. So that's kind of the way I try to manage change management. It's not a one direction thing. You have to do a multi-pronged approach to be successful.
Totally makes sense. I'm going to change gears just a little bit because you mentioned something earlier and it sparked an area that we can go into. You talked about Erlang C and you talked about kind of WFM, workforce management and scheduling, and to a certain scale, the curve kind of flattens out. Talk to us a little bit about, and a lot of the people who are listening in may not have a WFM tool or workforce management tool, or nowadays they call it WEM or engagement management. They may not have a tool. They may be using an antiquated Excel doc or back of the napkin math to try to figure out how many calls will come in. What would you recommend for someone to scale that area of the business? How important is it? Should they hire one person that oversees it? Should they hire a team of people? Should there be analysts? Because it's very numbers heavy and KPI heavy with handle time and service level and all these different KPIs. What would you recommend for someone who's trying to start out in that world?
Sure. So it's really going to depend on the scale. So the size of my organization was 65 members. And in any particular contact center, I probably had no more than 20 at any given time. And we had multiple centers. So we had 7 centers around the world. What we were doing is I used Erlang, and there were some Erlang tools there probably still is. I don't use them now because I've already got the information worked out. But to get started, Erlang can give you a good idea of what your service level will be based on some either known or some suspected metrics in terms of the handle time, the talk time, the after call work time. You start loading that information in, and you could identify how many agents you need to have to meet a certain target level. So ours was, we're trying to meet a 80% service level within 30 seconds. And I know a lot of places might use 20 seconds, but our ACD system was set up around 30-second increments. So I figured, good, we'll just go with that. So you use that to give yourself a good estimate based on the best information you have available. If you have a really good phone records, you could see how long some of the talk times, how many calls are coming in, and when your peak calls. We had a double hump, which is probably not unusual, where we don't get very many calls in the early morning, but as it starts approaching lunchtime, it hits a peak, and then we hit a lull during lunch breaks because not only are we taking lunch breaks, but so are our customers. And then right after lunch, I want to get right back up to it, and we start picking up around 1, 2 o'clock, and then it starts to tail off towards the end of the day. So what I did is you can't efficiently staff to those peaks. You have to go just a little level below. And because you're going to be driving your costs up, and those other parts of the day, you're going to have a lot of downtime. And so your costs are going to be higher, and you're going to have a lot of idle agents just, playing solitaire on their computers. You don't want that. So you want them to be engaged. You want them to be challenged. And there are going to be times during the day where you can't handle everything. And you have to have an overflow mechanism. We had something that would route the caller to phone mail to give them a message, and that they could leave a message for us for a callback. And that works as long as soon as we got done with the call, we would take that message and call them back. If we weren't calling them back until hours later, then it wouldn't be very effective. So you have to kind of adjust for the technology you have available in your phone system to manage that. The phone system will give you tremendous amount of information that you could use to determine how to shift your staffing, how to change behaviors within the wider organization. For example, when we had new product development meetings, I would ask the project manager to schedule them in the early part of the day or the later part of the day. Try not to do it right in the middle of the day, because we're going to impact our customers if we attend those meetings, but we really want to attend those meetings. We want to be part of the new product introduction team and be able to share what I think is extremely valuable information of issues that have happened with previous products and what we can do to avoid those in future products. So again, using continuous improvement in new product development, I think that's a key. Our feedback mechanism is big on that. So those are the types of things we would do. Then I would run reports. And for a lot of this, I was doing it myself. And in retrospect, I probably should have shared this with more of my team members so they had a better handle on how to capture this information and how to deal with it. Ultimately, I think a large organization would probably have some dedicated staff that's looking at those type of things, running those metric reports. Sometimes there could be reports that are run real time. And you could have some graphical displays that would show what's going on. We had that in our contact center. We could see how many calls are in the queue waiting, how many people are on active calls, how many are on after call work. And if the supervisors saw that the calls were starting to stack up, we saw a lot of folks in after call work, we might poke them gently to say, could you finish that up and try to get to this as quickly as possible? So you make those adjustments that if they weren't aware that the calls were waiting, they might take a little more time to do a really, really good job on creating a perfect article where, sometimes, a perfect is the enemy of the good. You have to go with as good and as you capture information, and then we work to perfect it later. So you have to make those kinds of calls, but that's based on observing the information, all the data you have available, looking at historic reports, looking at real-time reports, making adjustments on the fly. So that's what I would recommend folks do, is just look at that, capture information, get a good understanding of it yourself, and then as soon as you can, if you have the ability and the luxury to have other team members that can take this on as a full-time job, do that, because spreading that information out just makes it better for the whole organization.
Yeah, and it really sounds like that balancing act, right? You talk about that double hump, and you can't just staff for the whole day so that those two humps are perfectly allocated for, because you have all that downtime. But I also think, like, as you're using that downtime, it's a good chance to, bring up the leadership and others, right? And have them build out that knowledge base and continue to do other things during that downtime. But I like the call overflow, call back. Now with the technology, with these phones and the systems are available, with the auto callbacks, and customers can request, call me back in 15 minutes or leave your number. So it makes it a lot easier. And the customer knows that, okay, I was heard, even though I didn't get to speak with anyone, but I'm going to get a call back within X amount of time. So I don't think it diminishes the customer experience by having something like that.
Right. And then the other thing that's really, really important is, the contact center environment is a metric-rich environment. There's measurements of workforce management, schedule adherence, and those are all things that we would do. Mm-hmm. After call work time, and keeping track of that, and all those other, they're great for that. But the most important thing is the customer's view of it, right? So you have to survey your customers. You have to identify what are their pain points, what do they recognize from the support that you're providing. What are the things that you're doing really well? What are the things that need to be improved? And even if there's things that they wanted to reduce the hold time, but that sometimes their calls come in during that peak, and you're not staffed for the peak, you're staffed for the median. That at some point that's going to happen. Is that it's an acceptable level, or is it unacceptable? Mm-hmm. And it's only through the expectations of your callers, what they expect from you, which is going to be driven by what they expect from others, your peers in the business and in other companies, but also their expectations of what you've done in the past. Mm-hmm. So that's why I look at service level, first contact resolution, customer sat. There's a lot of metrics, but those three are the main drivers, and not necessarily in that order. The order could change based on your customer set. Mm-hmm. And your expectations. Is this a new customer? Then you want customer sat to be as high as possible. One of the drivers for customer sat is going to be first contact resolution, because my experience is from product support, and people will understand that a product is going to have an issue, that there's going to be something, they're complicated. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and they'll accept that as long as you can get them to a reasonable fix as quickly as possible. Don't drag this on. Don't guess. Just make sure you have the answer. So that's one of the things we drove really hard towards, making sure we had good, accurate articles that would fix the problems as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And so that first contact resolution drives customer sat. But if the customers take a long time to get, or you take a long time to get to your customers, you have them on hold listening to music in the background, they're not going to be too happy with you. So you have to make sure you have enough people available to handle their calls, as quickly as possible, as quickly as feasible anyway. So that's why service level is kind of a key thing. You're always going to have those times where the calls are going to go, they're going to have to leave a phone mail message, or you might not get to them as quickly as you'd like. But if you can get that target, with ours 80%, 30 seconds, you can hit that. You're generally going to have a little bit higher customer satisfaction. And the way we did our surveys is we didn't just blanket surveys to everybody, all of our customers. We were specific to the customers that contacted us last week. And then we would do that for a few weeks. And when we had a statistically significant amount of replies, where we would get a margin of error plus or minus 5%. So, okay, we're good. We could end the survey at this point, and I could report the results. So customer stat, first contact resolution, I always use the customer numbers when I'm reporting that to management. Even though I had metrics that allowed me to get close to it, I could anticipate what a first contact resolution case looks like, and I could measure how many we have in a particular day. So my report will tell me we're around 82%, but our customer satisfaction surveys would show that was 84%. So as long as it's within a few percentage points, my method of measuring is probably as good as anything. And but the important thing is the customers' reactions to it and what they're telling us, and that's what we would go by.
Yeah, we were talking to someone on a podcast earlier, and they equated the contact center, at least all the KPIs and metrics, to kind of like a baseball team where you've got on base percentage, RBIs, ERAs, all the pitching metrics, and you really have to pay attention to it. But I remember vividly that the person we had on said, "It doesn't matter unless you get more runs than your opponent." So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, at least in customer service, unless you're actually providing a good customer experience.
Exactly. It's wins. It's that customer satisfaction. That's the key.
Yeah.
So you get that, you've got a winning team.
Yep, exactly. Well, Dominic, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. We're running a little short on time, but you definitely hold the record for the most years, 32 years at a single individual company in this world. So you definitely know your stuff. I could talk to you forever about KCS and operations, but we do have to wrap it up there. I want to thank you for joining us on our show, on our podcast. And Alex, thanks again for being our co-host and being the co-pilot, or I guess I'm your co-pilot. Thanks again, everyone who was listening, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you, Dominic. Well, that wraps up the show for today. Thanks for joining, and don't forget to join us next week as we bring another guest in to talk about the trends around cloud contact center and customer experience. Also, you can find us at adleradvisors.com, LinkedIn, or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week on another Cloud Podcast.